be here and talk. Oh, this meeting's being recorded. Okay.
Don't leave the meeting. Stay in the meeting.
Stay in the meeting. Stay in the meeting. Yes. There's mine. That was my virtual slip up. It is such a joy to be here with you, David. I've been a fan of yours since Frankly in Love, but this book like announces you. I'm going to just say it. It announces you as a master of your craft. Like, I really was just so blown away with line by line, everything in this book, the descriptions, the characters. It's so textured. It's so layered. It also happens to be fast-paced, funny, fun, and it has like a real beating heart with this romance at the center of it between Max and Akiko. So fans of Frankly in Love and David's other YA books will love this because it does have your romance. So bravo. I'm your friend, but I'm also like really proud to know you because this book is really next level.
I know you're killing me. You're killing me, but thank you. This is just, I can't take a compliment. I'm terrible at it, but thank you. You're so awesome.
Please keep going. But I'm going to jump into questions because I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of different questions that we want to get to at the end.
Questions. I love questions. Literally asking anything.
Yeah, and I think you guys can drop them into the chat, and we'll take the last like 20 minutes to do an audience Q&A. But so I read a ton of books over the pandemic, like most of us. This to me was the most timely book. Like, it was a lot of things, but like timely is one of those words that keeps coming to mind. And I also think, I know that you were writing this in the last few years, which I'm going to talk about.
Yeah.
But I also think it's really interesting that it came out after the January 6th insurrection, because I feel like that was a moment in history where we saw like the consequences of like how online lives can spill over in some horrific and horrible ways into the real world. So I think to me, I would love to hear if you could tell people a little bit about the book, but I'd also love to know the genesis of the book, when you were writing it, and why specifically you chose to set it in 2018. Well, I know there's a time jump in the beginning, but
yeah, those are all excellent questions. I mean, there's a very intentional reason why I set it in 2018. But this book, I mean, kind of started like I've been working in tech for over 12 years as a user experience, expert. I started out in web design in the beginning, moved on to interface design, and that became user experience design, because it's not just about the interface, but also all the engineering that goes behind it and all the marketing that goes in front of it. That's mostly about how to get people to do what they want to do easily, but also how to get them to do what the business wants them to do. So there's a lot of like mind control happening in the tech world. And I mean, I saw all across, I worked in a social media company, I worked in cybersecurity, I worked in ad tech, and ad tech was especially interesting because ad tech companies are the ones that put personality profiles together of all their users, so they know what ads to serve up. That's how Instagram is so good at serving interesting ads, and I hate that they are, but their ad tech
so good. Like they're
so good.
Sometimes I feel like they're reading my mind.
Yeah, but they're not. They just have a really detailed profile of you. And the funny thing is, like, when I was working at that company, I was surrounded by brilliant engineers, smart people, and we all, to a person, had ad blockers installed on all of our devices and used proxies when we browsed. And I was like, we're just like non-smokers working at Philip Morris. Like, we make the thing, but we don't use the thing. And it's exactly in line with, like, I remember it's like Steve Jobs and other tech CEOs were forbidding their kids to use tablets and phones until they were a certain age. So they wouldn't even let their kids touch their own products. And I was that's an interesting paradox. Let's write about that.
Well, it's so interesting because I feel like you're describing something that I think a lot of writers can relate to. It's like almost like your whole life was gearing up to write this book in some ways, because even before you were writing it, you were like taking in information that let you be the person who could write the book.
Yeah. And I mean, one of the it took a long time to write just because things kept changing. And it took me a while to figure out how to write about technology, because even before the Capitol riot, there were the genocides in Myanmar, and that was totally enabled by Facebook, and Facebook turned a blind eye. And that was an atrocity that kind of gets no one in this country really thinks about because it happened somewhere else. But that definitely happened, and I was like, okay, how do I
In the
include
book,
this? How
you
do I
do a
talk about
great
this?
job of kind of referencing that in the book, of like
Yeah,
reminding
I mean,
the reader. Yeah.
thanks. I mean, there's so much stuff to talk about when it comes to tech, and since it's always changing, that's why I said it way back in 2018, because I wanted to just like
Way back. I love
first of all,
that.
it's way back in 2018, just to show how fast tech moves, but how fast we make it move. Like, it doesn't have to move that fast.
Mhm.
We make it move that fast, and we think like I was reading some tech blog, and they're like, well, the new iPhone does not have the traditional home button, and I'm like Kwanzaa is traditional. You know, you know what I mean? Like, wedding dresses are traditional. The home button was literally just invented like 10 years ago. It is not
Yeah.
traditional. But we talk about tech in this way that is ahistorical.
Mhm.
But I figure like setting it in 2018, and I put in these asides that I call my like David Attenborough moments,
Yes,
where
I was gonna
you know,
ask you about those. Oh my God, yes, because it's almost like the book. So there, you should explain them, and then I'll explain from a reader's perspective, like how, yeah, those
yeah,
jumped
I
out
mean,
at me for sure.
where there's a little like a side moment where it'd be like, by the way, going viral was a term used in 2018, and it meant to be extremely popular, which for some reason we use the language of pandemic, or the language of disease to describe this condition. And so it's sort of like explaining the world as if you were just born into it. And also I mishmashed all the companies and made up my own company names because I didn't want to be tied too much to reality, just to show how dystopian tech can be, and how tech actually we are living in a sci-fi dystopia right now, and we don't actually have to tweak it all that much to point that out. Black Mirror a lot of times was
For
like,
sure.
okay, this is just a documentary.
Yeah, it was so interesting. The one that jumps out to me, the little side, was the hashtag one, where it's like people
Yeah.
use hashtags for, and I just thought it was such a smart way. What it did for me mainly, which I love, is that I almost imagine the book, right? So like I have a hard copy of the book here. Like I almost imagine like an alien picking it up, like 300 years in the future, when we have surely like ruined the world and are all dead because of technology, like an alien coming down and being like, oh, like what is this, and then reading those passages and being like, oh, hashtags, I get it. Like it creates such an interesting texture to the book, and makes the book itself feel like this historical art, like this its
Yeah,
own.
I mean, I totally wanted it to feel anthropological, and I
Yes.
think a lot of it was I was explaining the internet to my daughter, who we've met many times, and she would ask things like, why do you want to put a video out there? What are all the hashtags? And when you explain stuff to a child, then it seems just even more absurd. They're like, who's watching the videos? Where are all these likes? And I'm like, I don't know who they are. They're strangers. So you want a bunch of strangers to like you? And I'm like, I guess.
Like,
It's
yes,
like,
very badly. I really badly want
yeah.
that.
And then she'll say like, well, I like you. And I'm like, well, duh, you're the only one that matters. Like, the strangers don't matter. Why do I care so much? And that's sort of that kind of stuff just seeped into the story.
Oh, I mean, you can feel it. And what's so cool is the book it's so textured. There's so many layers to it. I love the little time jump in the front of the book. It's almost like you're like stepping back into the book.
Mhm.
Like you just, there's some really cool craft stuff that I'm not going to get too nerdy here, but like maybe that's like off the video. I will talk to you about all
Like
the little
writer
like
talk. Yeah.
real like writerly very cool stuff that's going on in this book, but very cool. So I know we touched on this a little bit. I know that you spent 12 years in the tech world, right? Like,
Mhm.
and you explained that. Not that I was like looking up information before this or anything. um but I feel like the hacker world, and look, I'm like, I don't know, but I feel like the hacker world is very different, and this book touches on that, like hacker culture. And in my mind, like hacker, it's like, so that's like a very insular world that's very hard to access. And I was so curious, it feels so believable in this book, the kind of hacker elements. So was there any sort of like special research you had to do into like hacking culture? Because that feels like its own thing.
I mean, only a little bit, really. Because I did work at a cybersecurity company.
Do I just not know enough that I think
I mean,
it's
no, I mean,
serendipitous?
this company, it was so interesting because that was probably one of my favorite jobs, and they were tackling the problem of social engineering, what we used to call con jobs, where people try to scam you over email. Their specialty was email phishing, and these people just had this mindset of constant vigilance and security, and they think in terms of pen testing, which is short for penetration testing, which I really hate that term, but anyway, it's sort of like who can get you at what point, where are your weak points, they're constantly thinking about weak points. And there are a lot of white hat hackers, like the good guys, working at these companies, and just the way they saw the world was fascinating. They could look at a room or like your desk and start analyzing it for vulnerabilities. And as soon as they found one little thing where they could game a system or gain access or whatever, or just obfuscate, just like be confusing, cause a distraction, and then slip in the back door. That's how they thought, and they were the first ones to tell me there's no such thing as real security. Security is just fiat. It's just a commonly held belief that holds society together, based on trust. And if you build a society without trust, you don't actually have a society. You just have a bunch of people in the same area. Not much different from wild animals. And so that was a huge insight. And so, I mean, in the book, just really quickly, what the book is about, it's about this guy, Max. He's this 20-something-year-old, brilliant tech entrepreneur. He wants to be like the next Steve Jobs. And he really believes that like technology can make the world a better place. But he sees the company he works for, giant social media company, they're doing shady stuff with user data. He blows the whistle, immediately gets fired, and blacklisted from the industry that he used to love. And so he has crestfallen, and he embarks on this mission of revenge through the series of hacks that you're talking about, against the big five tech companies to expose them for what they're doing. And it just escalates from there.
And it's
So I mean,
it's such a page turner. I will say, like, it has all the elements of like, and we might have talked about this. I loved Dark Matter, the Blake Crouch book.
oh my God, I worship that book.
I love Ready Player One. And I feel like this book fits like squarely in that world, this like fun page turnery tech thriller, but also super well written and like nuanced characters and really asking like big important questions.
Yeah, and the main question really, like at the heart of it, I think the question that I was trying to figure out, first of all, I wish I could have been Max. I was not nearly as smart as Max,
We
or
all want to
Darren.
be Max. I feel
Yeah.
like that is like it was so aspirational, that element of the book.
Even though he's like lovesick for literally his best friend's girlfriend. But that's a different part of the story. Um, the question that I discovered that I was trying to figure out was, in the end, if you had to place judgment and say, has the internet been worth it? I don't know. I can't tell. And most days I'm like, no, hell no. But like some days I see something wonderful happening on the internet. Some days I see my daughter talking to her friends because we're cooped up in the house, from quarantine, and I'm like, thank God for the internet. Um, so I don't know. It's sort of like what I want people to read. First of all, have fun with the read, because I really wrote it to be a page turner very deliberately. Short chapters, short sentences. But I really want you to come away wondering, like, look at your phone with fresh eyes and be like, what am I giving up personally for the privilege of using this thing? You don't necessarily need George Soros to inject you with nanobots, 5G nanobots to track you. We sort of already have the technology, and it's much cheaper.
It is. There's so many great questions. And I feel like part of the book, this kind of like dovetails with my next question. So much of the book is about how much information is being taken from us at every moment, the data that is being mined from us just because we're using social media sites, we're using our phones, and how, like, I think there's one moment in the book, right, where God, I forget who it is, but they pull up Max's profile. Is it Akiko pulls up Max's profile and she's like, yeah, you live here, you do this, you liked this many things, you said this to this person's post, and just they were like, nothing's anonymous. Like maybe we don't have your name on this, but we could tell you like where this person lives and whatever. And so I just think it does such a great job of like focusing on how much is constantly being pulled when you are using these devices, when you are using social media. And so one of my questions, I would love to hear you talk about that, but also then one of my questions is what's fascinating to me about these characters is you have characters who at certain moments, they don't necessarily share information that it's like almost like your characters have secrets. Like Pilot, when we meet Pilot as a reader, we are let in on a big secret about him.
Yeah. So
He
yeah,
and
Pilot
Max,
though.
and Max and Akiko don't learn that side of him for a long time. And then even you were talking about Max. So Max, the main character, is so lovable. He's like, I don't know that you could have a more likable character, but what's fascinating about him is he is in love with his best friend's girlfriend, who's also his best friend.
Poor Max.
Poor Max, but also like you do such a great job of making that sympathetic. So he's like carrying around this big secret and like has like it slowly comes to the surface, but there's even moments where he doesn't like, I remember he gets a text specifically from Cal Piers about Akiko and he doesn't share that information with her right away. I don't think he ever shares it with her.
Yeah, no.
But so I'm just curious about how these characters developed, how they became so textured and rich. And if you want to talk about like sharing information on social media, I am always down to hear about that as well.
I mean, I started with a lot of ideas, which is sort of my weakness. Like I tend to start with ideas, and then it's up to people like my wife Nikki, who's like, she's like, will you write about people, please? Can you figure out how to turn the ideas into people? And I'm like, you're right. So because I was drawing on, certain technologies, they really, they draw deep from our primal roots, like cars draw deep from our territorialism and our need for power and dominance and status. And the television, any screen really just taps into our primal orientation response. Like what's happening outside the cave entrance, and we get addicted to watching moving images on screens. And the internet, I think it really taps into our deep-seated need for belonging and for validation, which is why we're very happy right now being reduced to numbers. Like, what is your follower count? And what is your like count? And we used to say things like, you can't reduce me to a number, and be really proud of that. But now, not only are we numbers, but we actually really enjoy it because we love the validation. And so that was the idea. And then that turned into Max, who's a kid of immigrants, and he doesn't really understand his parents. They don't really understand him. They love each other very much, but he doesn't belong anywhere. He's not Salvadoran enough to be from El Salvador, and he's not American enough to be mainstream American, which I very much relate to. And so for him, technology is a way to build his own place of belonging, and it represents his own personal utopia. And when he gets not recruited, put in touch with this reclusive tech billionaire, and this is Pilot that you're talking about. He's like this Mark Zuckerberg type who dropped out of the scene mysteriously, billions of dollars, built all this stuff. And it turns out that he confesses to Max that he built this world and he's deeply ashamed of it, of the online world that he built, because it pushed him away from his family. So his obsession with disrupting reality actually broke his own reality. And that's why he's attracted to Max's mission. And for Max, Pilot sort of becomes like the father that he sort of understood him better. And they have this complex relationship. But like you said, Pilot's got his own agenda that he never tells Max until it's too late. And they wind up causing more damage than they thought. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I know it's hard to. There are some spoilers. We're not going to spoil anything for anyone, but there are some spoilers that we could get into, but we won't. But yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think one of the things that really, I'm just gonna like gush again, but one of the things that really works about the books is I feel like I have a dystopian YA series that I wrote years ago, but like I think this is not dystopian. This I would consider a text thriller, but I think whenever you like get into that territory of like writing about robots, writing about the dystopias, writing about tech, it can feel the danger is it can feel cold sometimes or a bit lifeless. And one of the things that I think is so brilliant about this book is that it really does there's such a warmth to it and there's such a beating heart to it, and that is because of these characters, because of Max and because of Pilot, who, God, I like the guy.
I know,
I
right?
like, it's hard for me not to like him. Like, I just understand him, and I think you do a really good job of like making even the most complicated characters sympathetic and
Yeah.
understandable and
Well, these
complex.
are, I mean, first of all, thank you. You're awesome. I'm blushing again. But these are the people I worked with, like they were not necessarily evil people. And Pilot is deeply ashamed of the world he's created, but he's just human. And I remember we used to sit around and think about innovative ways to get more ads in people's faces, and track them with more relevant ads, which meant more spying, more surveillance capitalism. And we were rewarded handsomely for it by the business people. And we didn't even realize that our own creativity was being guided by venture capitalists and their goals for disruption, for domination, for changing people's behaviors, just almost like as a social experiment, for power. And it was a weird thing because we're all really nice people. We got to lunch, we'd shoot ideas around, and it was a very creative environment. But we were building just absolute wrong things, and it can happen to anybody.
And it's the norm now. I mean, it's everybody has a startup. Everybody has it's like,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
what really freaks me out too is like, started getting to TikTok just for work, and TikTok is all about chasing trends. And I start to wonder, like, are they trends because they're trends, or are they trends because TikTok has made them trends? And so you've got this
Oh,
sort
I
of
have a
snake eating
lot of
the.
thoughts about that.
Tell
I am
me.
curious. No, what do you think? I'm so.
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, because I remember doing so much user experience work. We're always like balancing that seesaw of like what the users want, and then what we want them to do. And if we gave them too much of what they want without enough of what we wanted them to do, then there was an imbalance. Um, and TikTok is driven by key performance indicators, or KPI. I feel like I'm back in my job again. But what they're driven by certain behaviors and numbers and statistics that prove to their investors that they're doing great as a business. And it's length of engagement. They want to keep you on the screen as long as possible. They want to reward the most extreme kind of content. And they want to reward people with big numbers without stopping to look at the quality of those numbers. And so I think this is seeping into culture. So tech culture used to be pretty separate. It used to be the realm of nerds and engineers and whatever. But now it's so mainstream, and tech culture is culture, and the algorithm is culture. And so when you see digital natives like Braden in the book, he's 17, 18. He doesn't know a world without the internet. And he finds the world of the past, the pre-internet world, like to be like this fascinating, almost wonderland, where no one knew what you're doing, and you could be actually kind of
Every
free.
different time, yeah. He's
Um,
such a great character because he's really, and it was so smart of you to kind of create this character to set in against these other characters who are so in it, because he's like he's the user they're all talking about,
yeah,
like he is the one who just has like, even there's a running gag that's so funny about how he only reads headlines, he doesn't read any of the stories, but he is a really
I was
um
I was telling Penn, our daughter, I was like, hey, did you know back in the day, we would take photos and never share them,
yeah,
and
you go to
and
the
we
CVS and get them
yeah,
printed
and
out.
no one took photos of their food ever. They thought that was weird. and almost no one took selfies. In fact, the word selfie didn't exist until 5 years ago. She's like, what?
It really is a totally different world. It's,
Yeah.
I mean, I've thought a lot about it. My book is set in 1998, and I thought about that a lot in terms of like what the pandemic would have been like in the 90s. Like
Oh my God.
we would have been so you couldn't do
How?
virtual work. You couldn't do
Yeah.
virtual, like people would maybe have just been in their homes. Like,
We'd have to look at 1918 to see the
yeah, that's
closest
right.
analogy.
That's right. You have to go all the way back. Yeah,
I loved
totally.
all your 90s trivia, by the way. So cool.
I know. I had to stop because I was feeling tapped out, but that's a whole nother story. Towards the end of the book, we see, well, first of all, I do want to know if any, you mentioned Mark Zuckerberg, did any real people inspire the people? Like, did you draw inspiration at all from any of, like, because we
Oh yeah.
know the Mark Zuckerbergs, the Bill Gates of the world.
Hmm. I
We're,
mean, there's like Peter Thiel, who literally was famous for infusing his veins with young blood. There is Jeff Bezos, who just seems to want to leave Earth, you know, just make his own Earth outside of Earth that he has total control over. There's a lot of examples of people who just want, of these CEOs, all dudes, most of them white. They just want to leave the world behind, and live exclusively on their own terms in sort of a ultimate techno-libertarian paradise, while being funded by the rest of us. And so it's sort of like this uber parasitic relationship. And I find that urge fascinating. Like, I don't want to write it off as just evil. That's too simplistic. I want to be like, what happens to a brain when they are so hyper privileged and so hyper validated constantly, um, justified or not? No one
become,
works hard
yeah,
enough to
you're
have
just,
$3 billion, you know?
yeah, you're just so wealthy that you're surrounded by people who would just agree with everything you say, you
Yeah,
know?
and it happened. I've seen it happen with people who make much less money.
Hmm.
And there's just something about people who almost, we tend to create hierarchies, and we tend to reinforce those hierarchies. And I'm like, why do we do this? And I don't have an answer, but I figure talking about it is just being aware of it is a step, you know,
It's super
to
fascinating.
get
It is
some sort of insight.
fascinating and troubling. And one of my main questions is, you know, towards the end of the book, we see that these five people, it's four white men and a white woman.
Uh-huh.
And I think there's the conversation happens. You have such a diverse cast of characters, and the conversation happens where it's like, these are the people who run the entire internet. These five people, like I think someone says like, these five people, and they're like, yeah, these five people run.
Yeah, and yeah.
Yeah, and like, what does that say if you are not a white man or a white woman? Like, what space is the internet? And it, like, I think one of the really interesting questions you asked too is about trolls and trolling, and like,
Mhm.
why don't we stop trolls? Like, there's a really satisfying moment where they do, and I mean, the answer
Yeah.
is kind of built, but I would love to hear you talk about that.
I so there's a lot of there's a little bit of blood in the book, maybe a lot, I don't know. And people
I was
are like,
into it.
why did you make this book violent? And I'm like, well, and believe me, the earlier drafts were like way more violent. So thank you, Lucky Stars. But like, I really wanted to make the internet physical. You know, we tend to think about the internet as just like a puffy little white cloud in the sky, and all the bits are just like magic, and they go into this angel hive or whatever. But it's still silicon, it's machines, it's air conditioning, it's electricity, um, and it's people writing code, and people who go out and have lunch, and they're good people, but they talk about interesting ways of shoving more ads in people's faces, for example, and they don't think they're doing the wrong thing, and that's happening all over the place. And so I think that's so interesting, the people aspect of the internet, and the fact that the users are largely ignorant of the people behind the world that they inhabit. And so I really wanted to make it very, very clear that no, it really is just a few people making a few decisions. The number of VCs in Silicon Valley is just not that many. and they have so much money and outsized influence. It almost mirrors the fact that anyone on the internet with enough luck and anonymity can have an outsized impact. Like QAnon is a perfect example of
Mhm.
just like a father and son team who wound up, controlling an entire sphere of politics. Um, that's sort of the outsized power that the internet has, but does it have to? And what about the internet enables that kind of behavior? Like I was talking to someone, and they're like, "Why doesn't the internet just have business hours? Like we all just take a break. Do we have to be on it all the time? Like
I love
we turn
that.
our lights off at night. Can we turn off the internet?"
Yeah. It's like the seatbelt and car analogy. It's like nobody has come up with like the seatbelt version of like for the
Yeah,
internet. Like we
yeah.
need some sort of, and this is my last question is about, there's a whole conversation about how Akiko would fix the internet. And she says, I'm not tech savvy enough to understand this, but she says two-way links that that it's like, and you explain it, and I kind of got it, but I wanted to know, yeah, like what the really fun, one of the really fun parts of this book is that these kind of rebels are like going through like, what if we revealed who everyone was? Like every troll one day woke up and realized like all their comments were under their real name now, and they had to face the music on that and they had to take responsibility. And so I guess I was wondering, how would you fix the internet? Would you do like 9 to 5 business hours? Would you do like, is there, you have best practices that you can share with us or?
Oh my God, I don't. I mean, I like don't use it that much. Like I stopped especially during the pandemic, when things are really really bad, like November. I was scrolling nonstop. I wake up, I was awake and bake.
Yeah.
Wake up, start scrolling, really build up my anxiety nice and high, and then just before bed I would stop. And I was grumpy. I was tired all the time. I was sleeping really badly, and then I realized I should just stop. Talk to my therapist, talk to Nikki. She's like, stop.
Mhm.
So I stopped altogether, including the good stuff too, like the fun stuff. And I realized that my brain had become like a hoarder house, just like full of just crap. And as soon as I stopped, I meditated like I usually do. And I flashed back super hard to this is not the Jet Show period of like my high school days. And I I was surrounded by magazines and books and recognizable things. And that was the last time I realized that I had headspace, pre-internet. And it felt huge and spacious, and it felt great. And I've since been addicted to it. I'm like addicted to not using the internet. Um, and I think, yeah, moderate your use. I think business hours would be awesome, but I know they'd never be able to do that. I think anonymity is a huge feature of the internet. Like it's sort of like cars. When you take people with faces and close proximity, and then you take away their identities and turn them into Toyota, Honda, whatever, and then give them tremendous speed and distance and facelessness, you get road rage. It's just something our brains are not equipped to handle that kind of situation and that kind of that kind of scale. And the internet's no different. Our brains are really just not equipped to handle it. Couple that with the fact that it's largely unregulated. um, I don't know. There's just kind of no escape, and I'm a little terrified because especially if a kid, uh, then there's more at stake for sure. Um, but I hope that this year has taught us a lot because we spent a lot of time on the internet, and we've seen all the good and bad it can do. Um, version zero actually does provide an answer, but I can't talk about it. But that's spoiling it.
I know. We can't talk about the last 40,
Yeah.
60 pages, really. So you'll have to find out for yourself. But yeah, God, it's an interesting question. It is.
Yeah, and
You just
there's
realize people don't have to sit with themselves anymore, because your phone
yeah.
is always there. You can, like, when you see people waiting online for whatever it is, your phone is there. You can be on TikTok. You don't have to sit with this anymore, which like,
And that is a cultural aspect that has really been engineered by corporations. Um, and I kind of wanted the book to sort of get you thinking about that too, how like um, a few corporate interests can influence your personal behavior. And Ted Chiang, who wrote The Story of Your Life, which is They
Oh
Made the
yes.
Arrival out of. I
Yeah,
love that guy.
amazing.
He
Yeah.
was giving an interview and he said that technology and capitalism are so closely intertwined that it becomes almost impossible to separate them. And with our phones, especially, this is very true. Like there's no separating capitalism from technology. And if our culture is being so uh, overwhelmingly defined by capitalist interests, then we have to interrogate capitalism too and
Mm.
be like, we all live in the capitalist system and we all sort of live these hypocritical lives where we support companies that do evil things, mostly because we don't have a choice. And what is that too? And how do we
Yeah.
reconcile that?
It's interesting. As I'm talking to you, I'm like, oh, I'm checking the questions on my phone that are coming in.
Yeah. Yeah,
1 second,
totally.
David. But I will say, yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. I think I read an interview where you were talking about how like the companies would say, they would say like, we're trying to better the world. And I was actually surprised. I was surprised to hear that because unless you are literally like the Headspace meditation app, like that, like I do feel like maybe they're trying to better the world, but like it just all seems in service of capitalism. It seems so
Yeah.
clear.
Well, it's this, I think, I mean, I don't know the exact history. Like the internet was not really created to solve any particular problem aside from like, was it in the 60s to make a distributed network of computers that would
Mhm,
withstand a Cold War like Soviet attack. But
mhm.
aside from that, it wasn't. And you had all this counterculture stuff going on. So all this utopian thinking with all these hippies. And I know that Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs, they're big hippies. Um, and they were just building technology to make their own utopia and have fun. But then all this money came in, and whenever there's a ton of money, the utopia becomes a dystopia. Um, and it's not even really capitalism. It's sort of like neoliberal capitalism, which is like, let's throw $10 billion and put scooters on the sidewalks and just see what happens.
See what
See if it
happens.
works out.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
let's turn everyone to a cab driver and see what happens.
yeah.
Um, and it's not because they're profitable, because like Uber has never been profitable. Bird scooters have never been profitable. It's almost like you then that's what I want to interrogate is what is that
Mhm.
urge, that human urge to sort of mess with people at scale, almost as like on a whim, as a social
Yeah,
experiment.
the disruption. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I
like
do want
why?
to get, we have tons of reader questions coming in. So
Oh, sweet.
I gotta get to those. So
Okay.
I'm gonna just start hitting you with them. Um, David, how long did it take you to write this book? I loved it. And I loved it as well.
Oh, thank you. It took like 3 or 4 years. It was torturous. It started out as like this horror story actually, and it was mostly focused on like the whole 99%, 1%, because like was it Zuccotti Square? I forget what it's called. The protests were happening, and I
Hmm.
was really inspired by that. And I was like, let's make a story out of this. But it was too in the head and had no heart. And that's when Nikki was like, can you make this about people? Can you make it personal? And I was like, make it personal. I did work in tech for 12 years. So then I started thinking about that.
I totally relate to that. Starting with an idea though, like it's hard. That's how my brain works too. I start with the idea and it is, then you have to kind of
Ah,
go in and like figure out your way in, which is
yeah,
tricky.
you're a high concept writer.
Yeah, I like idea. I like ideas. I like questions. Okay, so I'm going to ask one of the ones that came in earlier. I loved Frankly in Love. Are you planning on writing more YA romances? And I also would add to that, can you tell us a little bit about the difference between writing YA and adult fiction in
Oh
your
yeah, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I am going to write some more YA because I am fascinated and vividly remember what it's like to be a teenager. And because the difference between YA and adult, I mean, I think Nikki and I debate this all the time, but like what we've come to is that YA is about hope and about potential. Because you know you're on the cusp of becoming your own self and taking care of your own world. Uh, and then you're an adult and you see some stuff, you know, you go through some experiences, good and bad, and you realize like, what do you do when there's a situation that there doesn't seem to be any hope, or that doesn't seem to have, or the potential is muddled, or the jury is out on whether it's good or bad, or right or wrong. And the internet is very much that situation. It's like the jury's very much out on whether it's good or bad. I, depending on the day, like I'll say one or the other, you know.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
feels
that's
like
kind of the difference.
adult fiction exists in the grays.
Yeah, in the
More,
grays.
you know.
But I mean, I love writing YA too, because
Yeah, I know. And I mean, you cannot beat the YA audience. They are so fun and so passionate.
Yeah, and they believe, and they make me believe, you know.
And so this is for both of you. Have you ever written a character that was inspired by you or is most like you?
Frankly, in love.
Really? So that's the one.
Yeah, I mean Frank Lee, the kid in Frankly in Love, he's like the kid I wish I could have been in high school. Like he's way cooler, he's more woke, he's smarter. He's just I don't know. He gets to learn everything I took me 20 years to learn about, like
Yeah.
love and family and all that. He gets to learn all that in 1 year. So I wish I could have
That's
been
the
him.
fun thing about being a writer is that you can kind of rewrite things in your life.
Yeah. We call it inspirational. What about you?
Yeah, exactly. For me, Jess is by far, I always say, she was a junior in high school in 1998 on Long Island.
Or was
Spoiler
she?
alert, I'm old. I did a good job with my skincare, but I'm old. Okay, so
I loved your book, and everyone should read it because it's like it
thanks.
is such a fun, like
It was so funny it was so funny reading them. Like I saw aspects, like I feel like we had like a mind melt, like we were thinking about similar things at the same time.
Yeah, totally. And yours is all about like technology and reality and perceived reality. And it's just awesome. But it's also like just it's an awesome chase scene too. It's an action movie.
Thanks. I like the fast pace reads as well.
Oh yeah.
So this is a great question. What has it been like to write and publish this book during the pandemic? So like we're obviously like coming out of it, but it still feels, you know.
Oh yeah. I mean, I have Super Fake Love Song, which was my second YA book. That came out in November during lockdown. This came out last week during not lockdown, but still during pandemic. We're still doing virtual events, and on the one hand, like lots of people show up, which is great because it's just easy. But on the other hand, I miss people. You know, I really miss seeing people, and I miss taking selfies and signing books, and yeah. So there's a really disembodied feeling that is kind of tough to get over. We did go to Barnes and Noble at the Grove the other day to visit our books, and we happened to run into a bookseller, and we had a nice chat and everything. So that felt great. I was like, oh, this is what I've been missing.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise it's kind of tough, you know. And I know there's like pandemic stories coming out, but I personally think it's way too soon to like. We need to unpack this, and it's not over yet even.
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if you can write about the pandemic yet.
I certainly couldn't. I feel like that would be really hard. Like you don't have any distance on it.
Yeah. Remember how long it took for like 9/11 stories to come out?
Yeah.
It took forever because we're still processing that for years.
Yeah, and even then it's like which were the big ones? It was like the Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close was the one I remember the most vividly as being like the first one that felt like that was the one that I remember being like the first, like, this is about 9/11.
Huh. Yeah.
Jonathan Safran's forward.
Wow. I was thinking Jarhead, but that was more about the war. Anyway, sorry. Sidebar.
I also, this is like a side note, but I love one of my favorite movies is Ex Machina, and do you love that movie
so much?
Yeah. So one of the things it's such a great movie.
Writer envy.
Yeah, but what I loved about Pilot's like house and all his spaces was it gave me that same feel, like just like how like we cannot wrap our brains around the level of wealth that like where you created the internet, you can create your own physical spaces that look, and there's a real like vibe to all the scenes where they're in Pilot spaces. Do you want to describe Pilot? He's like a reclusive bajillionaire who essentially created the internet, and
he built a lot of like the essential platforms of the internet, and he exiled himself out of shame because he didn't like what he built, because he lost his daughter, he lost his wife because he was so obsessed with work. And he's this sort of disembodied spirit. He sees everything behind glass, and is kind of always floating above the ground, and is fascinated by humans because he doesn't understand them, and yet he has enough power to just destroy them all if he wanted to. And so he's in a weird spot, and it is sort of like, it's take all the big tech CEOs, all the billionaires of the world, and smash them into one, and you'd get Pilot. Like Jeff Bezos, what is he just bought a super yacht or something that has a dock for another yacht? It's like a yacht with a yacht.
It drives you, Jeff Bezos drives me crazy. He drives me crazy. I can't even follow him. I think it's so interesting you describe him as being like disembodied and behind glass, because there's so much of the imagery around him is like ghostly when he catches the light, or he's standing in certain ways that he's really described as this kind of ghostly figure.
Yeah, and that he's sort of like the ultimate, because people really do have an urge to shed their bodies. You work with your hands, and then you move up and you become a manager, and you tell people what to do, and then you become a CEO, and you ignore everyone else, and you make very, very high level decisions. It's not coincidental that we call them high level decisions. We want to get higher and higher and farther away from the ground for some reason. I'm not sure what that is. I think it's power, because then you can do very much with very little effort. But Pilot is sort of the ultimate expression of that desire to be away from the icky, sticky, muckety muck, to just be like almost like a god.
Yeah, he's very godlike. I was curious about his name as well. Was there a reason you chose that name, or?
Well, I thought it was because he is the pilot, of destiny. Where he's going, no one knows. But there's like a Tennyson poem or something. I was reading Matched by Ali Condi, and there's a poem in there, and the pilot in there is the guy who guides you across the river to the other world. And I was like, well, that's cool. That's a coincidence.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So this is a fun question. What is it like being married to another author? Do you and Nicola ever edit each other's work?
First of all, it's awesome. We met in grad school. We were in our first writing workshops together. We would talk about stories all the time. We haven't stopped since. And yeah, anything she writes, I read. And anything I write, she reads for the first time. And we give each other notes, always. And it's fantastic. Like, she knows all the crap I went through to get this book out. And I know all the crap she went through to get instructions for dancing out, which took just as long. And it's fabulous. And it'll make you cry.
Came out yesterday.
Yesterday.
It's incredible. That's another great one.
And it'll make you cry and laugh at the same time. Not sure how she.
And I think it's really, I was saying this to her too. It's like, it's a very complicated book. Like it's about the complications of love, which Nikki wrote, Sun is also a star and everything, hugely successful. But this one is more, it's the gray of love, like how there's pain in love, loving someone makes you vulnerable.
Yeah. And my question is the internet worth it? Her question is love worth it? And she does
I
answer.
never thought of that. That's so interesting that you guys literally, like, within a week of each other have 2 books, and you are asking these big, very like kind of twin questions.
But it's pretty funny. Like we'll see something, or we'll think of something, and then we'll be like, I call dibs. You can't use that. I touched it last. That's mine. Like, I see a funny name or just an anecdote or something. We'll be like, that belongs in a book. So it's pretty awesome.
You guys are you have very unique styles though, and do you want to talk about, I would love to hear you talk a little bit about what's next, and also Joy Revolution, which is a big
deal. Joy Revolution is an imprint that me and Nikki started. We've been wanting to do something like this in some form for a long time, because we never saw ourselves in rom-coms, and yet we're both huge romantic goobers, so we wanted to make an imprint featuring young adult stories about love, about people of color, written by people of color, and yeah, Barbara Marcus over at Random House, president of Random House Kids, she gives our full support, and we have, so we're like a boutique imprint with a giant machine of Random House behind it. And the manuscripts we've been getting have been fabulous, and we're super psyched. So there's that.
I
And
also
as for
can
what's,
imagine, like, there are so many great editors out there, but I think you and Nikki have that brain that you can really look at a manuscript and help a
yeah,
young author. So if you're an aspiring writer, you have a novel that fits in that.
we have a wish list. We have a submission wish
No.
list. And our fabulous editor Bria Reagan, she's got a really keen eye too. She's amazing. And we share a brain with her too. Got really lucky with her. But let's see. As for what's next, I just sold another book to Mark Tavani, same brilliant mind reading dude who published this. He's scary, by the way. He'll pick stuff out of your book that you didn't even know you were doing, and he'll just explain it to you, and you just got to play it cool and be like, "Oh yeah, I meant that." Yeah, totally. But that book is called City of Orange. It's another adult book, and it's a post-apocalyptic story about this guy who wakes up with no memory. He's been beat up. He wakes up, and he needs to find out if his wife and kid are still okay. And so he embarks on this journey. And
Well, I love this space
very
that
different
your
too.
writing exists in. That's so, I can't wait to read that one.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. And we're talking about covers. I have an edit to do, but we're going for maybe, hopefully next year, 2022, but we'll see.
Very cool. Very cool.
And then me and Nikki might be working on something together, but you didn't hear that here.
Ooh, I think this is being recorded. So
No, the
you
internet.
have to like bleep that out. Put black things over a bar over our mouth. I'm trying. I think that's all I have. If anyone wants to drop in with one final question, I'll do it. I'll let you have a final question. But if
Yeah,
not,
ask me anything.
I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, I think. Oh, well, what are your favorite genres and who are your favorite authors?
Oh God.
It's a hard one.
I'm not really stuck on any genre. I think that, like, I just read The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. It was amazing. That was the perfect quarantine book, by the way. It's about forgetting things. It's about living in a surreal island village in which people forget everything. And I finished Nikki's book, and it's amazing. And I also am looking at my bookshelf here. God, what was the last thing I read? And I started Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro.
Oh, that's on my list for sure.
Yeah, he writes about technology in a way that does not, it feels so like completely human. Like Never Let Me Go is one of my favorite books.
Never Let Me Go is like, yes, that book is a perfect novel.
What about you? Hit me with some books.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, they said, do you want summer reading, Rex? And I was going to say Nikki's book is, well, obviously version 0, duh, but like, but Nikki's book I thought is just perfect. Like that was one I had to slow down the reading process to make it.
That's what she does to you.
You just go right through it. So, and
I mean, her books are short, but they're dense, you know?
Yeah, and the characters she's so efficient the way she writes too. It's like she does so much with that group. There's an amazing group of friends in Instructions for Dancing that is just, they're all so real. You guys do this both really well, is like your characters too, they feel so real, like you could know them, or that they be right next to you talking to you. So that was a great one. Over the pandemic, I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which I thought
I'm dying to read that.
It's so good and so dense and rich, and it comes together in this really great, satisfying way. I just read some nonfiction that probably I shouldn't wreck here.
I'll recommend Cast by Isabel Wilkerson.
Oh yes, yes.
That's like required reading.
I've been like inching through that. That's beautifully written too. I did read You over the pandemic. You by Carolyn Kepnes, which I had not read.
Dude,
And
she's an amazing
oh
writer.
yeah, that voice is phenomenal. It's just
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah, it's like it's really you feel like she channeled a voice like that came from somewhere else because
I
it's
mean,
so specific and unique.
if you're that the dude, Joe.
That
I mean,
dude, yeah.
if you're into her, you should read Providence, which
Oh,
it's a superhero book for people who hate superheroes, and
okay.
yeah, and
I
it's
did not
phenomenal.
know that's what Providence was.
I know you can't really tell, but
Yeah, the cover
it
doesn't.
sneaks up on
Yeah,
you. Yeah,
yeah, very
very cool.
cool. Well, I think that's all we have, but I think Jordan's gonna pop on. I loved talking to you, David, as always. I mean,
I mean,
Thank
thanks for having me, and it's so nice to see you. It's feel funny because we're in the same city and we're like on Zoom call together.
I know it's so
But yeah,
weird.
It's Liza here from Penguin World. I just want to thank you both so much for doing this for us. And thank you to everyone who came out to watch. For future news about Penguin World's book club, please check out the Penguin USA's social media. And we'll see you all next time.
all right, thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye.